I found this absolutely fascinating. In fact, one of my kids forwarded this article to me. It's in The Atlantic. It's by Emily Esfahani Smith, and it was published back in November of last year. So this is not brand new, but this is brand new to me. And I was just amazed by this. And this, it starts out, the article entirely is on relationships. But I see a parallel here with politics that I'd like to share with you. So let me first share with you the relationships part of this. This group of researchers, Actually, the main one is a psychologist by the name of Tai Tashiro, and he wrote a book called The Science of Happily Ever After. And this started in the 1970s, this research into what makes relationships work, what makes relationships fail. And what are the things that you can observe when people are interacting with each other, when a couple is interacting with each other? What are the things you can observe that will allow you to predict whether that relationship is going to survive and be happy, or whether that relationship is going to be either miserable or fall apart? And it's sort of the holy grail, right, of relationship science. And 40 years, 50 years of research here, or 40 years, I guess, of research, and they have figured this out. And the way they did it was they put couples in. They wired them. They hooked them up to machines that measured their blood flow, their heart rate, how much sweat they were producing. I mean, this is all the stuff that's associated basically with lie detectors, And a lie detector doesn't actually detect whether you're telling a lie or not. It detects whether you're stressed or not. The theory being that when people tell the truth, they tend not to experience stress, and when people are lying, they tend to experience higher levels of stress. And so their heartbeat rate goes up, the ability of their skin to conduct electricity goes up because the sweat glands put more moisture into the skin, so it's more electrically conductive and stuff like that. And so they put couples on these kind of lie detector machines, these, measuring all these physiological feedback systems, very, very subtle, but physiologically measurable. And what they discovered was that couples that were successful, they referred them to the masters, as opposed to couples that were not successful, they referred to as the disasters. Okay, people who had been together at least 6 years and were still happy in their relationships. And there's a lot of people who've been together 6 years and are not happy in their relationship. These were people who were happy. And the disasters were either unhappy or had already broken up within 6 years. But so they sat these folks down and had them interact and just observed them. He invited 130. It started out, this was in 1990. This was one of the first major follow-up studies to this. It was done in a lab at the University of Washington. And he invited 130 newlywed couples to spend the day at his retreat and watched them as they did what couples normally do on vacation: cook, clean, listen to music, eat, chat, hang out. And this is when they got this incredible insight. Well, first of all, when they hooked them up to the machines, what they discovered was that the disaster couples were in constant fight or flight mode when they were interacting with their partner. So they were like on high alert, ready for a fight. Whereas the masters, the happy couples, they were totally laid back. Their physiology was calm. Their blood was calm. Their heartbeat rate was calm. Their blood pressure was calm. Their skin was dry. They were not, they were not experiencing the fight or flight response at all. So here's the key to the whole thing. They said throughout the day, partners would make requests for connection. What Gottman, he's one of these major researchers on this. John Gottman is his name. He began this research in 1986. This was with his colleague Robert Levinson at the University of Washington. And throughout the day, Gottman says, partners would make requests for connection. He called them bids. For example, say that a husband is a bird enthusiast and knows a goldfinch fly across the yard. He might say to his wife, "Look at that beautiful bird outside." Okay, he's not just saying, "Look at that bird." What he's actually saying is, Well, I'll just read. This is so well written. He's not just commenting on the bird here. He's requesting a response from his wife, a sign of interest or support, hoping that they will connect, however momentarily, over the bird. So now the wife has a choice. She can either respond by turning toward him, her husband, or turning away from him. And he says, although the bird bid might seem minor and silly, it reveals a lot about the health of the relationship. People who turned toward their partners in the study responded by engaging the bidder, showing interest and support in the bid. Those who didn't, those who turned away, they don't respond, or they respond minimally. They say, stop interrupting me, I'm reading, or, who cares about a damn bird? Those people were the disaster relationships. And as Emily Smith writes, these bidding interactions had profound effects on marital well-being. Couples who had divorced after a 6-year follow-up had turned toward bids 33% of the time. In other words, only about a third of the time did the couples who failed, if one person in the couple said, hey, how are you feeling today? Or look at that bird, or, try to initiate a conversation and the other person shut it down. 33% of the time was the success rate, only a third. Whereas the couples who were still together after 6 years and were happy, their turn toward bids, in other words, where the other person in the couples, regardless of what the content was, it could be something you're completely not interested in, 87% of the time, 9 times out of 10, they meet their partner's emotional needs. I remember just a couple of nights ago, Louise and I were laying in bed, and the dog was on the floor on Louise's side of the bed, and he was doing something cool. I think he was laying on his back, sound asleep, but with, all his legs spread out. And Louise was like, you got to see this. You got to see this dog. He's laying on his back, and it's so cool. And my first response was, I've seen the dog lay on his back asleep. I really don't care. I mean, I love the dog. I love Louise. But, that was the first thing that went through my mind. And then I thought, but wait a minute, this is important to Louise. And so I in fact, I injured my back a couple of weeks ago. So it was actually painful for me to get to kind of turn around and get over there and look at the dog. But I did it. It's like, this is because, hey, this was important to my wife. People who don't do that, or only do that a third of the time, their relationships go down in flames. People who do that 90% of the time, 87% of the time, their relationships survive. Now, and Gottman says he can predict with a 94% certainty rate, simply by observing this behavior in a couple, whether their relationship will survive. So how do you, and in fact, he says contempt is the number one factor that tears couples apart. People who are focused on criticizing their partners miss a whopping 50% of positive things their partners are doing, and they see negativity when it's not even there. Kindness, on the other hand, glues couples together. Kindness is the most important predictor of satisfaction and stability in a marriage. And the hardest time to practice kindness is during a fight. So, politics. You got Hillary and Bernie right now in a fight, as it were. How do you bring this together? How do you bring the party together? How do you make things work? Kindness. You respond not with the assumption that somebody is behaving with bad intent, which is what happens 66% of the time in these couples whose marriages fail. 2/3 of the time, they assume that when the other person is saying or doing something, it's either irrelevant or meaningless, or it's an attack directed at them, when in fact it's not. Versus the couples who 90% of the time assume the best of the other person, who would assume, for example, that, if a guy introducing Bernie said an off-color remark, as he did yesterday, Mr. Song, that really, Bernie had nothing to do with that. Just like the colored people joke, Hillary had nothing to do with that. There was no malice there, right?
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
So the groups that assume malice, they have wreckage in their relationships. The groups that assume that there's not malice, they're the ones that are successful. How do we bring this into politics? So what can we learn from this relationship science that can be applied to politics? That if you want to have a successful political movement that holds together, and that, in my personal opinion, that would be the entire Democratic Party. then you don't start out assuming the worst intent in another person's behavior. You give them an opportunity. You say, okay, I'm going to assume the best until you prove otherwise. And I'm going to assume that you're not, Hillary Clinton was not maliciously making fun of CPT, and that Bernie Sanders, frankly, I doubt he even heard Mr. Song's comments. I've given a lot of speeches where I've had people speak before me, and I can tell you, as a public speaker, typically you don't pay attention to the people who are speaking before you because you're involved in getting ready for your own speech. And you're moving around and you're meeting people and you're talking to people backstage and there's all this stuff going on. And so, now the hit on Bernie is, he didn't condemn the guy from the podium. Well, I doubt he even heard it. But even if, it's because, he's a pretty wise politician. So let's assume the best of our politicians. Let's assume that Hillary Clinton's intentions are the very best. Let's assume that Bernie Sanders' intentions are the very best. Now, I'm not altogether willing to apply that to Republicans. But although I think that there's probably some Republicans who are, the ideologues, the true believers, the Paul Ryans, who read Ayn Rand and who studied the Chicago School, Milton Friedman's economics and all this kind of stuff, who actually think that the world will be a better place if basically we live in an autocracy. If we live in an oligarchy, if the wise people blessed by God who have all the wisdom and all the money, if they run everything, that it'll make for a more stable country. I mean, I remember hearing that argument from friends of my father back in the 60s, and knowing that they actually believed this. That if the rabble, in this case back in the 60s, it was people like me, who were protesting the Vietnam War. If the rabble was allowed to run the country, it would be a disaster. In fact, in many cases, you shouldn't even let the rabble vote. So this is my starting point. Now, from there, on April 11th, Greg Sargent, in the Plumb Line, and I've been critical of Greg on occasions, but I think he really. And frankly, I think the headline, it was more of a clickbait headline. The headline is, here's one way the Clinton-Sanders brawl could end well. But it's a really good column that he wrote for the Washington Post on April 11th. And basically, he's making some suggestions. Here's, after this is all done, and either Hillary or Bernie are the party's nominee, here are the things that we should talk about. The party could discuss. Number one, the party could discuss doing away with superdelegates, or at least scaling back the number of them. The Republican Party has superdelegates too, by the way. They call them unbound delegates. But they don't have anything close to the 700 that the Democratic Party does. Number one. Number two, Greg Sargent suggests, limits on the number of primaries that can be held on one day. He writes, Clinton won big on days such as March 1st and March 15th that held many contests at once. That automatically favors the candidate with more national name recognition and establishment support because an insurgent struggles to catch up when they have to compete in many states all at the same time. Having a bunch of Democratic strategist Simon Rosenberg says, quote, having a bunch of states all go on one day creates an unnatural advantage for wealthy and high-name ID candidates and disadvantages insurgents. The contest should be more spread out. It should be the principle of the Democratic Party that we are not advantaging privilege. Another suggestion he makes, a more rational, transparent process for setting debate schedules. You think? And finally, he says an end to caucuses. Now, with regard to ending caucuses, I don't know. I'm ambivalent about it, but I really think that, primaries are the way to go, and open primaries at that, for that matter. To watch more clips from our programs, hit the Watch More Videos button over here, and please be sure to hit the handy dandy subscribe button so you'll always be up to date. Tag, you're it.